In this lesson, we're going to focus our attention on understanding appropriate components required to create IT security policies. And so these different types of creations are what we call implementations. And really what we want to analyze and understand is what foundational components need to be in place to create an organization that exemplifies strong security habits and principles. It's important to keep in mind that the security policies create are a useful tool that can be utilized in order to help develop a organizational culture that focuses on ensuring effective security constraints are in place. This is important because if a organization has security policies that are poorly designed, then that can lead to damages to the organization in the term of security breaches. It could be result in compliance fines and violations. And these are all events which can effectively undermine the ability of the organization. And so therefore, it's important to ensure that appropriate security policy details are in place for strong implementation. And so in this lesson, we're going to focus our attention on understanding processes required for implementing IT security policies. And so there are a couple of different things that we want to focus on. Specifically, we're going to focus on understanding ways in which we can describe issues related to information systems security policy implementation and enforcement. We'll also focus our attention on understanding simplified implementation processes, target state, executive buy-in, cost and impact, policy language, development and implementation strategies for security awareness policies, and policy implementation issues. These are all concepts that lead to us being able to describe simple implementation processes, explain the key process steps and related concerns, and identify the importance of a communications plan. So there can be many aspects that need to be taken into consideration when you're attempting to develop and implement an IT security plan for an organization. The complexity of the organization has a large effect on factors that can influence the success of various security policies. So the complexity of the organization involves the organizational culture, the type of industry the organization is active in, as well as change processes that are already in place. So developing a simplified implementation process can be a major project for an organization to undertake because it needs to include a detailed IT security plan that includes ensuring that business risk, cyber threats, compliance requirements, policy changes, employee awareness, training, policy implementation, and governance factors are in place. And so this can be a difficult undertaking for an organization. So in order to develop a process that is straightforward and simple, we can implement the IT security policies in a consistent manner. So in order to do this, we want to create an IT security policy that is less about documents and more about controlling the environment the policy creates. And so the policy implementation is going to need to consist of a series of different steps that can be put into practice. So these steps include Of course, appropriate compliance, and analyzing the business risk as well as the threat vectors that are involved. We'll want to control the target state, and the target state is going to be a general term used to describe a future state related to specific goals and objectives. So when it comes to security policy terms, we want the future state to represent the tools, processes, stakeholders, or people that would need to be involved in order to achieve the requisite goals and objectives. With this in mind, we can think of describing our security policy in terms of goals and objectives that help to support the target state. And so this leads in us making considerations for other components, policy language, employee awareness, implementation, and governance and monitoring. And this is a iterative process that requires constantly evaluating various aspects. And so it can be difficult to overcome some of the obstacles that might hinder having a effective policy in place. And so one of the ways this can be done is with a distributed infrastructure. Distributed infrastructure is basically describing when we have various networks connected. So it could be laptops, tablets, and smartphones, and other components that are connected. So within these organizations, some of the technological components might be outside of a data center. And so this means, do we need to implement centralized security policies? In order to effectively do this, the target state can be utilized to describe how to accomplish this. Other challenges include outdated technology. Um, Outdated technology could be in the form of hardware or software that makes it ineffective and inefficient for an organization to carry out its technical practices in a consistent manner. So if outdated technology is pervasive in the organization, then it needs to be addressed. And so we can do that in four basic ways. We want to replace the outdated technology. We want to write security policies to best practices and issue policy waivers for that outdated technology. We want to write security policies to the lowest, most common standard so that the technology can support it even if it's outdated. And then we want to write different sets of policies for the outdated technologies as well. With this in mind, the ideal solution is going to be to replace all outdated technology, but we have to keep some tenets in place to ensure that that happens in an effective manner. Another challenge that can persist is the lack of standardization throughout the IT infrastructure. And this can occur because there is a lack of consistency with the configurations or deployment of a diverse population of technologies. A lack of a standardization throughout the organization's IT infrastructure is a problem because it can lead to similar technologies being used differently by different lines of business. It's important to note that we want each line of business to have its own technologists that apply the needed standards to similar technology. And so this could result in a needed diversity in security approaches in order to ensure that this challenge can be over time overcome. It can also create delays as well. So it's important that executive management support overcoming these hindrances that can affect the organization. So there are expanded layers of control that we can consider as well. So these expanded layers are going to consist of various components. And so we have our outdated network controls. We have our outdated network segment controls. We have outdated operating systems. We have outdated applications as well. And each one of these can affect our security policy implementations. So if our portions of our technology has outdated network segment controls, then this means that we have a greater reliance on segment controls. Outdated operating systems means that we have a greater reliance on operating system controls. And so what this basically means is that for any component that is outdated, we're going to have a strong focus on identifying ways in which it can be improved. And so we want to keep in mind with the target state, understanding those appropriate business risks that can affect it. The business risks are going to be what are going to be described as how the policy will reduce the risk to the business, and more specifically, how it will reduce risk to an acceptable level. Compliance needs to have a policy in place that ensures that the business is compliant with laws and regulations. So this is going to be particularly important as it relates to verticals in healthcare as well as in finance, such as payment processing. And threat vectors are going to be used to describe how the policy will prevent, mitigate, and detect IT security threats. So these are all various factors that can affect the cybersecurity intelligence efforts within the organization. It's important that executive buy-in is obtained as well. Executive buy-in has an important impact because it's important that executives get approval from senior managers, because formal buy-in from the senior managers will help support the costs that might be needed to incur. So it's therefore important that executive management have clearly defined expectations and goals to help facilitate effective buy-in. So executives want to know and will focus on, at a minimum, the level of commitment that's being asked of his or her team, the impact of the policies on the current environment, the value the policy brings, in other words, what risks the policy can address, the metrics of success, and how success will be measured as well. This is also important to ensure that appropriate lines of communication are established. Executive management sponsorship is important because users will be less likely to be eager to participate in awareness training and to support the policy implementation. Support for a policy implementation takes time away from an individual's regular job. And so we want to ensure that this is mitigated by having executive management sponsorship. This means that we want to have a fund in place with a defined budget so that it can be used to help with buying tools and creating training materials for the initial startup costs. And so this is likely going to apply to users that are more likely to participate in security awareness training and support policy implementation with executive support. It's important to note the funding is going to be needed. Communication from management supporting the program is important, as well as having multiple executive supporters in place to ensure that this effort is successful. Additionally, there can also be non-technical hindrances that might affect um, the, uh, the, the information security policies. So when we're talking about non-technical hindrances, we can think of things like there being a distributed environment. Many organizations operate in a distributed environment where you may have workers that are working in different buildings, workers in different cities, and also in different states, countries, and on different continents. So this creates a highly distributed environment, especially in the post-pandemic era. So therefore, we need to have different parts of an organization that can have different views of risk. This requires that there be a diverse set of leaders that can delay security policy implementation. And so the first challenge here would be to get senior leadership to agree on a common set of security policies. Another non-technical hindrance is user types. So the diverse set of views is not only needed by leaders, but it should also be reflected by users as well. In that we're going to have many different types of users that work for the organization. So we have to keep in mind and operate in a form that's conducive to the existing organizational culture. And then there can also be appropriate organizational challenges. These organizational challenges could be financial challenges, such as having unclear accountability, a lack of a budget, lack of priority, or tight schedules. In this case, it's important that management take accountability for protecting required information.